Hello. Good morning, everyone. It's nice to see so many people here. So my name is Kovid Goyal, and I've been creating FOSS software for almost 20 years. I'm here to talk about my journey in open source and hopefully inspire you to start yours. So I want this to be a sort of community session. I'm going to talk a little bit, and then I'm going to ask you to ask me questions, and I'll share my experiences about whatever interests you. So before I get started talking about my experiences, let me first talk a little bit about what open source is. So at a most basic level, it's of course making the source code of your programs available. There are many different open source licenses with different requirements and different obligations. But the most important thing is that everyone should be able to access the source code, make their changes, and ideally share those changes with the larger community. But more than just sharing code, what's more important is the community that develops around open source projects. The sort of open source ethos is that you are responsive to your community. You take feedback, you take suggestions, you encourage people to participate in your projects, you take ideas from the larger community, you implement them, you're welcoming, and build a community over many years around these open source projects. That's one of the best aspects, the most fun part of doing open source is building and participating in these communities. Okay, so with that out of the way, I've been doing open source for 20 years now. Today I maintain about a dozen different open source projects, the most prominent of which are Calibre and Kitty. Calibre is a open source ebook management software. It can allow you to do pretty much anything you want with an ebook. Edit it, read it, convert it, put it on your devices, make it available in your browser, whatever you like. So Calibre started 2006-ish, and today it has about 3 million active users. It's 500,000 lines of code, 50,000 commits. It's got a very large community of active contributors, over 200 of them. And Kitty is a relatively newer project that I started 6 years ago, and that's a GPU-accelerated terminal, and it's my personal attempt at moving the terminal ecosystem forward, and that's also a pretty large project nowadays. It's about 10,000 commits, about 100,000 lines of code. So before talking more about Calibre or Kitty, let me give you a little story about how I personally got started in open source. So this was way back when, in prehistoric times. I was a grad student in the US, and I used to use the KDE desktop environment. I think it was version 2 or 3, I don't remember. So it had this extension system called Super Caramba, which allowed you to make little widgets in Python and show different kinds of information on your desktop. So just around that time, I had finished reorganizing my email into folders, and there were like different folders for different subjects and so on, and I was really proud of this. So I learned about Super Caramba, and I decided to make a widget to show the number of unread email in each of my folders. At the time, to me, Python was new. It was easy to learn, so I picked it up quickly, and I made this widget. And I was really proud of it, and it was my first sort of public program or software that I had published. And I even had a few dozen users. I put it up on kdelook.org. And so that was my first introductory experience in open source, and it was fun. It felt really good to have something out there that other people actually used. And it was a small thing. I mean, it would be a weekend project, really. But that's how I got my start. And then around the same time, Sony released the first ebook reader, e-ink-based ebook reader called the PRS 500 in the US. Now, I'm an avid reader. I read over 100 books a year. And at the time, I was a poor student. I didn't have a lot of money, so I couldn't buy a lot of books. So what I used to do is I used to download free books from places like Project Gutenberg as plain text files and read them on my handheld GPS. This was a MyTac Mio. It was about this big, and it had a monochrome screen, and it was not a lot of fun to read on that. So when I learned about the PRS 500, I was really excited. I went out and got one immediately. But when I got home, I was saddened to discover that it didn't work with Linux. So Linux is my operating system of choice. So it used a proprietary ebook format, a proprietary USB protocol, There was just no way to get it to work with Linux. The software that Sony provided only ran on Windows. So I went online and I sort of looked around for solutions, and I found a community called Mobile Read. And there were a lot of enthusiasts there who sort of were into reading on mobile devices. So I got together with a few people there, and we decided to reverse engineer the USB protocol used by the PRS 500. So I remember I used to print out pages and pages of USB packet captures in binary and in hexadecimal format. And I used to spend my lunch breaks from school poring over these with a pencil. So eventually, after a few weeks of doing this, we got to a point where we could talk to the device and we could transfer files on and off it. And so I packaged up this code and I released it on Mobile Read as libprs500, a suitably geeky name. And it was quite popular. A lot of other Linux users were really happy to use it and make their devices usable in Linux. So now the thing was that there was also the fact that the ebook format for the PRS 500 was proprietary. And Sony provided no good tools to convert, say, text or HTML or whatever to their format, which was called LRF. So again, I decided to reverse engineer that format, which was another big headache. But it got done, and eventually we added a sort of conversion component to libprs 500, so you could convert your text files and your HTML files to Sony's ebook format. And so that, I sort of stuck a rudimentary GUI on top of it, and I released it as libprs 500 0.6 or something, I think it was. So at the time, it was Linux-only software, because I only knew Linux. I'd been using Linux for many years at that point. And, but enough people wanted to use it on their operating systems, Windows, Mac OS, whatever. And so there was a lot of demand from people that I should do that. So for me, it was kind of a hard choice, because I have to spend a lot of time learning how to build and distribute software on those platforms. And back then, things were a lot harder than they are today to find information and to do these kind of things. I think even getting things working in virtual machines back then was a black art. So anyway, I decided to put in the effort because I really love reading, and I wanted the ebook ecosystem to be open, or at least to have an open option. So I decided to put in the effort, and eventually I renamed libprs 500 to Calibre, and I released it for all three major operating systems. And from there it grew and grew and grew, and it is where it is today. So that's kind of how small beginnings lead to larger things. And I've been working full-time on open source for almost 10 years now, and that's funded almost entirely by voluntary donations on Calibre and Kitty. And this all started out as a joke. So when I first released libprs 500, I put up a donate button on the website, and I sort of figured I'd get a free pizza a month out of it. And initially that was the case. The donations weren't that great. But once I released it for Windows and Mac, and it became more useful to a larger community, not just Linux enthusiasts, the donations picked up, and I found myself in a place where I was deciding whether to apply for a job in my field, which was theoretical physics, or to continue doing open source. And I talked to my wife, and she supported me, and we made the decision that we'll go all in on open source. And it worked out very well. I'm very happy. I live a life where I can make the world a little bit better. I can build something, do something that I love. I benefit both the open source community and the readers of the world. So it's been a great joy and a great pleasure, and I really encourage all of you to make those first small steps. Maybe they won't lead to something big, maybe they will, but you won't know unless you try. Yeah, that's basically what I want to say, and I'd encourage you all to ask me questions. I have a lot of experience, and so feel free to ask me about anything, and I'll try to do my best to try to answer. Yes.
It's not really a question, it's just to say thank you. I've been using Calibre since 2010, I think, or a little later, I'm not sure when I came across it. And I was very surprised to find out that an Indian was maintaining it.
Yeah,
it was unusual. No, it was really mind-blowing. Then, everybody who has a Kindle probably uses like at least in India.
Yeah.
Everyone, all my friends use Caliber to sign out books or whatever. So it just makes stuff so doable. Thank you for meeting.
Yeah, my pleasure.
And I started using Kindle. I'm not bad. Thank you for that.
All right. Someone there?
Yeah, I just want to understand, like you mentioned about small beginnings and how you eventually led to like started in 2006 and from then to where you are today. How important do you think was persistence and how much do you think like people who start things but they don't go anywhere and then those are like dead projects and stuff like that?
So I think persistence is very important, but one of the nice things about open source is that you tend to do it if you love it. So like I love programming. At the time I was a student doing a PhD in physics, but my first love was always programming. And so I used to just love coding. And that helps, it helps keep the motivation, because the nice thing about open source is you are your own boss in many ways. So you can choose what you want to work on, you can choose what you want to do, and that helps keep the motivation fresh. So I personally never found it difficult to, it wasn't a grind for me. I didn't have to, force myself to come into work every morning. So one of the things I talked about briefly was community, and I do a lot of work to maintain Caliber's community. So I personally answer still, even today, 50 plus pieces of communication, from users every single day. And sometimes that can get a little tedious. A lot of people ask the same questions again and again. So I actually have automation where I can just press a few keys and standard replies go out to these kind of questions. But that community interaction also has its own rewards. I get a lot of mail from people, thanking me like this kind gentleman here did. So that feels good, and that builds your motivation and keeps you wanting to come back. And so, as long as I can keep it financially sustainable, I intend to keep working on Caliber my entire life. So that at this point, after almost 16 years of working on it, I don't feel any sort of doubt that I will keep working on it as long as it's possible for me to do so.
Thanks a lot.
Hi, Kovid. Hi.
Thank you for giving us this amazing piece of software. So my question is that have you ever gotten into problems with companies like say Sony or Amazon, because like in a way we can say like we are facilitating getting books from other sources other than Kindle Store or something. So maybe Amazon may not like it. Have you faced any kind of problem?
So at one point, there's a funny story. When I was still at Caltech, I got contacted by Sony, who I told you their software was really bad. So they actually wanted to buy Caliber. They wanted to make it into a Sony product and use it as their official software. So I actually went to their corporate offices and I had some discussions with them, but it didn't go anywhere because I really wasn't willing to sell it. But as far as Amazon is concerned, I think I've had one interaction with people from Amazon, and it was just some technical issue with how Caliber converted to their proprietary format. But yeah, I haven't faced any issues from companies. I have been careful to, for example, so Caliber has an extensive plugin system, so people can contribute plugins to add functionality to it. So there is infamous plugin to remove DRM from purchased books. So I've been very clear and careful to not allow this as part of sort of Caliber's official list of plugins. So if you go to the Get Plugins page in Caliber and you try to download those plugins, that particular plugin will not be listed there. So that was something that I was clear about. I did not want to associate Caliber closely with anything that could possibly be illegal. Other than that, yes, there have been no issues with companies in all these years. Right here. Hi.
First of all, this is a pleasure with my friends. Thank you for Caliber. It's more or less materials I've been able to read books in the last couple of years. So, thanks, man. This is an extensive work with ebook formats. Do you think there's any sort of job skill ebook goes to unified format for ebooks at any point in time?
Well, there's EPUB, which is used by everyone other than the gorilla in the room, Amazon. So Amazon recently announced that they are accepting EPUB in their email conversion service, so there's hope that someday they'll start accepting it on their devices as well. So that's kind of the best candidate for a unified ebook format. But sort of one of my goals in Caliber is to make it easy to move between formats. So, it's not too critical. You can get a book in pretty much any format, and Caliber will shift it to whatever format you need for your devices. Mm-hmm. I'm sorry, I didn't. Well, my interest in literature was first. Well, no, actually, my interest in hacking was first. So my mother was doing a PhD in economics, and she needed to do some numerics for her work, and so she got a ZX Spectrum. This was like a computer, which was just basically a keyboard that you connected to your TV, and you programmed it in BASIC. So I used to play games on it as a kid. And so my mother, being a smart lady, sort of said that, okay, I'm going to get you a book in which they have the source code of games, and you have to type it in, and once you finish doing that, get the game to run, and then you can play it. So that was my first introduction to sort of programming. And I think, I remember, I think I was 7 years old, something like that, and I had to mug up multiplication tables for school. I'm sure all of you have gone through something like that. So I sort of rebelled, and I said, I'm going to write a program to print out multiplication tables. And I did it in color. With, you could input the numbers, and it would print out a table with color and columns and stuff like that. And I was delighted with my efforts. So ever since then, I've been into computers. As for reading, it was just something that I've been doing forever. And physics started because I read a biography of Einstein, and I learned about relativity, and I had my mind blown. And so I wanted to become a theoretical physicist. So I ended up at Caltech doing a PhD in quantum information theory. And, well, yeah, then programming took over. Okay.
Yeah, quick question. On all your years of, what are things you would go back and said, like, I wish I knew this earlier? Like, what are things you would like have done differently?
Well, one of the biggest challenges for me doing open source was dealing with the assholes. I don't know if I'm allowed to say that word, but I was talking about community and all these users and the nice things that people say. There are also people who say not so nice things. And when you've poured your life and soul into something and you put it out there, it really hurts to hear negative feedback, and you tend to take it personally. And there's something about human psychology that sort of makes it that negative feedback sticks with you much longer than positive feedback. You'll remember something that somebody said that was critical much longer than something that was positive. So if I could go back and tell my young self anything, it would be to learn to ignore such assholes, and sort of just be on an even keel. At some point, the only time I came close to burning out, on Caliber was when I used to, have a lot of internet arguments with people who, disagreed with me. So, but yeah, that is one thing I would love to go back and, tell my younger self.
First of all, thank you a lot for Kitty. It's something that I use daily, and you have no idea how much show-off I am on screen shares with it. So you went through your story with Caliber. I'm sorry, I haven't used Caliber. I'm not really into reading audio books that much. But can you take us through what inspired you for Kitty? Because there are so many terminal emulators out there. There's Xterm, which is low CPU resource usage and stuff. But Kitty is like the most perfect thing I've seen in terminals, at least in my personal preference. So can you please take what inspired you to make this GPU-based, GPU-accelerated terminal? Because this is quite fascinating.
So back in 2016, I think it was, 2015, 2016, something like that. I used to use GVim as my editor to work on Calibre. And I started installing some plugins and extensions there for various features, IDE-like features. And I found that they were slowing down the experience a lot. So I sort of analyzed the problem, and I realized that it would probably be faster if I could make a terminal that was fast. And I looked into the existing terminals out there, and there was nothing that was fast enough. So I sort of, given all my experience by that point, I sort of figured I could do better. And apart from fast, the funny thing is that the one feature I really, really wanted and I missed in a terminal that was holding back my move from GVim to a terminal was curly underlines. So when you have errors or spelling mistakes in your code, the IDE will underline them, and you can correct them in place. So there was no way to draw curly underlines in terminals. And this really ground my gears. So this was one of the first features that I implemented in Kitty. So I started out writing Kitty not as a GPU-accelerated terminal, but just using, I think, Qt and trying to make it as fast as possible. But then I sort of, in the course of doing that, I realized that making it GPU-accelerated would make it much faster. And the other thing that sort of my personal software philosophy is that I like my software to be powerful, flexible, configurable. So Kitty has things like a remote control, kittens to script it, and so on. So again, there was no terminal that sort of quite did all that. So like you mentioned, Wes-term, which came much after Kitty. I think Kitty and Alacrity were released at roughly the same time. So I mean, it was basically personal needs that led to it. I mean, I spend my entire day in a terminal. I do everything in a terminal, so it was really for me. Actually, your question gives me a nice point to make. So one of the things that helps scale open source projects beyond the first few hundred users is automation. So I invest a lot of time in my own tooling and my own automation so Calibre, for example, has 70 dependencies, and these are like gnarly old school dependencies written in C and C++, which have to be built for each different platform. So I've set up something called ByPy, which allows me to do all this in an automated fashion. And this was a lot of work. It took me literally months of work to do, but over the years, it's really paid off. And so I sort of advocate for people to use as much automation as they can. We're all developers. We like to write code. So use that superpower to increase your efficiency and allows like a single man project to sort of have a large community, millions of users. Okay.
Hi, thanks for Calibre. And I had a question on Calibre. I deal a lot with ebooks and conversions, and Calibre probably the best in class in terms of the number of both input and output formats the ebook convert tool supports. Is there any plan to make it separate as a standalone project that works outside of it?
It has a command line tool, ebook convert, you can use to convert books.
No, but you still need to install the whole Calibre.
Yeah, no, I don't have any such plan. It would be a lot of work for very little benefit, in my opinion.
All right, thanks.
All right, looks like we're out of questions. So thank you all for listening, and I hope some of you start your own projects. All right.